Hello, YouTube and Sean. This is Hive Radical. I first off want to thank you for your sustained civility in our ever propagating dialogue. We go off on several different threads here, and just getting into this particular one, and I knew it would take forever in the comment section to respond to this, so try to see if I can get this out in this video. So it started off on our talking about carnally minded, our various assertions, and we kind of got into the nature of both of our conceptions of God. I brought up the fact that God had commanded genocide, that things weren't cut and dry, at least not in terms of something you can easily calculate. I believe ultimately good and evil is cut and dry in terms of our access to knowing what is and isn't for us. I kind of, to put this in perspective, I look at this similarly to, say, the constants of the universe. They've discovered that as energy levels vary in the universe, the constants change, but they changed at a constant rate. Likewise, God's commands are reflective of the context we find ourselves in, but they are ultimately consistent and eternal. We got into here a bit later on, after I said, I'll just get into your replies. You said, what is your definition of evil? Only monotheism that denies other co-eternal beings offers a definition to evil. Without a single source of infinite authority from the Creator of literally everything, there is no absolute. Without absoluteness, there is no evil, for all is relative. But please, I would still like to hear your answer to the question. I'm going to read a few more of your questions, so we'll get them on here. You say, spoken like a true humanist, God did not create evil, just as he did not create darkness or cold. Opposition to the infinite God that he is evil. He did not create opposition to himself, just the freedom to do so. Are you ascribing your God as infinite? Because you would then have to describe all the countless gods out there as infinite, and all beings as infinite. That is the nature of your God and universe. That idea constitutes the right and wrong. Good and evil are relative. I'll point out where you're incorrect on this. You say, eternal law. Who decides what is eternal law? The God of the Bible demands worship and complete submission to him. He is the source of eternal law. If your finite, exalted man, better known as a superior extraterrestrial, imposed those standards on me, I would be on their rebellion to such an usurper. Now I'm going to go and address this, kind of going to the Garden of Eden, because it's kind of a prime example. It's the prime condition to test out your theories, your views on this. Saying that you would have to have some absolute and non-relative God. I agree that he would have to be absolute, but him and other things being eternal does not make him not absolute, because co-eternal things, well, okay, I'll get into this. I talked about, I gave the verse, or not verse, it is connected to verses of Scripture. I said, without opposition there can be no existence. If there can be no variability in light, then all is one, a compound whole. Now my point here in saying this was, in your view, there was God, and he's in your view eternal, absolute, unchanging, and so what would happen is if, as you believe, I believe you believe ex nihilo creation, or I have a hard time seeing how you could believe something else, because if it was ex deo, then we would have proceeded from him. But either way, God produces something, and if he perfectly produces that something, even if he gives it freedom, it will have a perfect nature. So even with the freedom, its perfect nature would not choose outside of that. For example, going back to the Garden of Eden, as I mentioned, God placed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he gave them the two choices. Now, they could have remained there forever if there had never been anything to try to prompt them to try the forbidden fruit. That's why Satan's place in the Garden of Eden is a key, because if Satan had not been there, they would have never taken of the fruit. Now, if you're going to say that they would have taken of the fruit even if Satan had never been there, then you have to concede that their nature, by their creation before the fall, was flawed, because it has an insurrectionist spirit, it has a rebellious spirit in it, and to have that rebellious spirit would have to originate from somewhere. It's not merely freedom, but it's a tendency, it's the divergence from nature. And so, in order for that to happen, without that, Satan would need to be placed there in the Garden of Eden. Who would place him, in your view? If your God created everything and nothing is co-eternal with him, then he would have had to have been the creator of Satan. And if he was the creator of Satan, he would have been the direct cause of evil. But likewise, if it didn't require Satan, if he just placed Adam and Eve in the garden, and they had eventually had the tendency, and they tried the fruit, it would demonstrate that he had created beings with a nature that was inherently rebellious against him, and thusly flawed. And so your whole argument is wrong here. Now I'm going to move on to your point, where you say, without absoluteness, there is no evil, for all is relative. But please, I would still like to hear your answer to the question. Okay. First of all, what defines existence? I mean, how can you have something actually definable and exist and have purpose and have just anything? You look at the simplistic language of the digital era, the binary, on and off, one way or the other. You would have a hard time communicating something if you didn't have an opposite, if you didn't have north and south poles, if you didn't have varying degrees of light, if everything was one, if there was no variance at all in anything ever, then everything would be sameness, and there would be no purpose to it. So that your God would have no purpose in whatever he did. I mean, it would be an absolute, but it would be an absolute absurdity, because there would be no reason behind it. There must be an opposition in all things. You have to have varying degrees of light for light to have any meaning. And so I'm going to have to continue this on in another video, because it's getting kind of extended and I don't know if it'll stay on there.